Welcome back to the channel. In today's video we are tackling the rod bearings on the M3. So this car has original rod bearings. They were never done. I am the second owner. The previous owner never did them, so I know for a fact they're the original ones. So the car has been heavily modified engine wise while in my ownership, and since these are original rod bearings, before I continue doing more mods to the engine, I want to make sure that the engine's reliable. And so what we're going to do is we're going to upgrade the rod bearings to some ACL Pro ones with a slightly larger tolerance than the OEM ones, and hopefully that will give us a better rod bearing wear overall with the more power that we're going for. I think that's enough talking. Let's jump to the shop and start the rod bearing install. Okay, so we got the car up on the lift. The first step we have to do with the installation of the new rod bearings is flush the engine oil. And before I do that, I'm going to use some liquid moly engine flush to just clean out all the grime and make sure everything's really fresh for the new bearings once we install those. So what we have to do with this engine flush is just pour it into the engine. Okay, now that we've poured this into the engine, we're going to let the engine run for about 10 minutes and then we can flush the engine oil out. It'll come out really light viscosity, so it's going to come out really fast initially. This oil has been probably in the car for like maybe 1,000 miles and it'll come out pretty black. Let's let the car run for about 10 minutes and then we can continue. Alright, so we got the engine harness on to do the rod bearing, so we make sure we secured it from the top. This is the secure point. You want to go for the S54, it's right at the top of the engine. And then you put the engine harness, depending on what type of model you have, you put it on both sides of the fenders. And then the engine is secured from the top. So the next thing we're going to do is go underneath the car and we'll start undoing the subframe to get access to the bottom of the oil pan. Alright, now that we've drained the oil from the oil pan, we can proceed with taking the front subframe off. Also make sure to have the engine supported from the top, just to secure that it doesn't fall off, and the way I showed it in the previous clip. So the next things, or the stuff that we have to take off to drop the front subframe, we don't have to drop it completely off the car, we just have to remove it out of the way to get the oil pan out of the way, is take off the lollipop screws right here, screws or bolts. Then take off the subframe bolts right here, these two right there, and then we're also going to disconnect the sway bar right here, so on the front. I'll show closer pictures of it, and that should ensure us to drop the front subframe. When you're doing this job, or when you're doing rod bearings, make sure you get all the gaskets as well as engine mounts, because it's very convenient to take them off at this point since the subframe's coming off, but you can also just have fresh engine mounts, which is pretty important to performance if you're looking at that. Next thing we're gonna have to do to take off the oil pan is disconnect this hard line, stainless steel line right here, off the oil pan, and disconnect the sensor. This is a sensor that I blew out when I was doing the angel eyes and shocked the system, so I got a replacement for that. We got also some replacements to do within the oil pan, like change this gasket and the filter in here, and some other bits. I'll show you guys everything I bought, and I'm gonna leave all the parts in the description below so you guys can do a full refresh when you guys are taking this oil pan off. I think that's enough talking. Let's get to disassembling the subframe. What's up? Look at this.
Car is registered and basically everything is part in the system. So let me show you this after.
Oh, shit. Alright, so now we've gotten the oil pan loose from the subframe, so the subframe's off. I forgot to mention earlier, you have to also decouple the steering shaft to the steering rack from right here. I got a new part here, so I'm going to be exchanging it for a new part. You should probably do the same thing, just to make sure it's fresh and that this bushing is working properly. So we're going to disassemble that. I also took off the filters and the oil temp sensor just to drain out as much oil as possible before we start working on it. One thing you have to watch out for is the sway bar will swing down when you're taking off the subframe, so be careful with that. Otherwise, it's pretty simple. And then if you have xenons, you have to take off this end link that connects to the control arm on the bottom, and that controls the headlight position sensor. And if you don't take that off, you have the chance of breaking the sensor. So that's all you have to look out for. We drained the whole oil pan now. The next thing we're going to start doing is taking off all the bolts. 2 bolts that we already took off when we were doing the transmission are inside right here. There's 2 of them. Just make sure you grab those 2. They're inside right here through that hole. And then you can start taking out the outside ones, and then we're going to start dropping the oil pan. It's going to be pretty simple. We're just going to take off, I don't know how many screws it is, but we're going to take all the bolts off, and then we'll take a look inside and see if there's any metal shavings.
Dripped a little bit onto you. Told you you'd get dirty.
What we want to do is take off that nut right there, remove the gear, pull it off, and then we can pull this piece off all the way down. There's a few bolts, which we're going to do right now, and then we can have full access to the rods. So I'm going to do that real quick, and then we are going to start working on the rod bearings and seeing what they look like. They might look really good, they might be worn. We'll see how. I actually don't know how many miles are on the rod bearings, since I was told that the rod bearings were never done. Let's get to it. We got the oil pan gasket off, the gasketing, and we got the oil pump off that circulates the oil. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to do cylinder 5 rod bearings, or the pistons. And what we have to do is we go in with the tool and we're going to loosen it up. These are the original bolts, so they're going to have to be pre-tensioned. So if you're doing original bolts and not upgraded ARP, you have to get brand new ones. So I just saw that these are the original ones. And I have another 12 that I bought that we're going to do, since ARP is completely sold out and I don't see any time soon where they're going to be in stock. So we're going to do cylinder 5 and cylinder 2 at the same time. Once we finish those 2, we're going to rotate the engine, and I'll show you guys how to do that. So we get access to cylinder 6 and 1, and then we'll rotate it one more time to get access to cylinder 3 and 4. And you just have to rotate the engine twice to get access to the bearings, and once you have done that, you can start reassembling it. So let's take a look at how to take off one of these, and then I'll do the rest myself off camera, just since one of them will show you how to do all of them, pretty much. So yeah, let's start unscrewing them.
Yeah, see?
Some of it other properly the first time.
There you go.
I think these are original. Alright, so now what we want to do to get the top one off is you push up and then you loosen it, and now you can pop this one out. Let's take a look at the rod bearings that came out of my car. And these were the original rod bearings that came with the car from the factory. I've confirmed that. For nearly 200,000 miles on the car, these do not look half bad. As you can see, we do have some wear through the initial coating of the rod bearings, but nothing nearly as severe as you see on other cars. So I did have two rod bearings showing copper, and this was one of them, like a little sliver of copper right there, and a little sliver of copper right there. So those were the only locations that we had some copper showing. Otherwise, we have some removal of the coating on the rod bearings, but nevertheless, these are pretty good for the S54 engine. Now that we've finished looking at my old rod bearings, let's jump back to the new ACL ones. I have the new ACL Pro Series race bearings, and what we're gonna do is we're gonna place them in here with the groove lining up with the groove. Try to put them in gently. There we go. So they've lined up. And now before we put them in, we're gonna add some assembly lube. We're gonna make sure to lubricate this surface nicely, and then we're gonna put it back into the car. We're gonna put the other rod bearing inside the car as well and add some assembly lube. I might not show it because it's gonna be kind of difficult to show the installation of that rod bearing since it's inside the engine. But we're going to do the same thing. We're going to place it in, and then we're going to add some assembly lube inside to initiate, to have enough lubrication on the first startup to not damage the rod bearings. And then we're going to put this back in the car. So let's put the paste on, and then let's go to the car. There we go. So we applied a generous amount of installation lube, and we're going to do that the same on the inside, and then we're going to put the rod back together, and then we'll do the other 5, and then we'll see how it starts up once we have everything reassembled. Now we're going to start torquing down the bolts onto the rods, and what we're going to do is there's a procedure that you want to follow. So we're going to go with 5 Newton meters, or if your torque wrench goes down to like 6.8, you want to go down to the lowest setting. So we're going to start with like 1 and then go to the other equally. Once you've done that, we're going to torque it up to 20 Newton meters and then do the same thing. And then you want to go in and you need a torque wrench that can do degrees. You're going to go in and do a 105 degree torque, and you're going to do it in a single motion until you get to the 105 degrees. And then you're going to do the other side as well. Once you've done that, you're going to have to back it up 1 full turn, and then do the same procedure over again 2 more times. 5 Newton meters, 20 Newton meters, and 105 degree torque in a single motion. And then once you do that a total of 3 times, that rod is done, and then you can continue to the next one. You want to always alternate in between the bolts so you don't over torque it on one side and not on the other side. So that's pretty much all we're going to be doing now. So we're going to start torquing down all these bolts, and then we're going to put the oil pan back on the car and start it up and see how she's running. We're getting ready to install the oil pan gasket. What we did is we used some Scotch-Brite to sand down or roughen up the surface to clean it up from any residue from the old gasket. We did that on the engine block as well. We also took some time to clean the interior of the oil pan and the exterior of it as well, just to make sure that it's nice and clean, and if there is an oil leak, we can catch it by seeing any new oil and debris forming on the exterior. So now that we've cleaned it, we're going to start installing it back on the car. car down on the ground and she's running beautifully. It sounds like she's running perfectly, no issues. As expected, there's no issues, so I'll keep you guys updated, but we're going to do a break-in period of 1,000 kilometers. I don't know how many miles that is. And then I'm going to switch the oil one more time. I'm using the Liqui Moly 10W60, and I also did the engine flush, so it's running with super fresh oil right now. And then once we do the 1,000 kilometers, we're going to go in and flush the oil again. Then I'll put Ceratec in with a new batch of oil. And then the car should be ready to go to rip and go to the dyno, and then we can finally see how much we're making power-wise with the E45. Alright guys, that's it for today's video. As we just saw, the rod bearings weren't as bad as I actually thought they would be. I thought there would be a lot more copper showing, but given that the car has 200,000 miles, we barely had any copper showing. Somewhere on the rod bearings, but nothing too severe, so that was pretty amazing to me. One of the next videos we're going to be doing is installing a new clutch and doing some maintenance on the transmission, because the clutch does slip a lot, especially when I floor it. You can kind of feel the clutch slipping because of the added power that we have now. So we're going to be doing that next, and then we can finally go to the dyno and put down some E85 numbers and see how much the flex fuel kit brings to the S54 engine. And how much it brings when you have a modified engine. So yeah, I think that's enough for this video. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe as always, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.